Chairman, we're now live.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Corporate Finance and Property Select Committee. A warm welcome to those attending and to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, which is Hillingdon, London. My name is Councillor Mills and I'm Chairman of the meeting this evening. Details of the business to be considered are shown on the agenda, copies of which are available in the room and accessible online under the live broadcast. For those present in the room and intending to speak, please know that you'll be filmed and any statements you made will be recorded and made public. A reminder that when speaking, your voice will only be audible when the microphone is switched on, so please remember to turn it on when you speak and then off when you've finished. We're not expecting a fire alarm, so if that does go off, please follow lids from Democratic Services to the fire exits and out of the building to the designated meeting points. Before we move on to the formal agenda, I'd like to introduce councillors and officers present with us this evening. On my right, Councillor Bridges and Councillor Tubadar. On my left, Councillor Edgington and Councillor Bliss. For officers this evening, we're joined by Naveed Mohammed, Head of Business Performance and Insight, Matthew Kelly, Head of Procurement and Commissioning, Kevin Byrne, the Head of Health Integration and Voluntary Sector Liaison, and for Democratic Services, Liz Penny. That brings us on to the agenda, and agenda item 1 is apologies for absence.
Apologies have been received from Councillor Vanessa Harangi, Councillor Raymond Graham and from Councillor Richard Lewis, with Councillor Wayne Bridges substituting.
Thank you for substituting. Agenda item 2, any declarations of interest before us this evening? No, thank you. Agenda item 3, to receive the minutes of the previous meeting dated the 21st of October. And have any comments on those? Councillor Edgington?
Yes, I see that on page 2, the third resolution was that Democratic Services would investigate the matter of the named data protection officer. Don't know whether that happened. Maybe I'm just missing my emails.
No, I actually got an update on that today, thank you, Councillor. I've been advised that it should be the Borough Solicitor, and that will be updated. Thank you.
Anything further? No. With that, happy to agree those? Thank you. Agenda item 4, confirm that all parts before us tonight are part 1 and they will therefore be held in public. So that moves to agenda item 5 and the main substance of the meeting and agenda. So agenda item 5 includes, hopefully members have looked at this, on pages 13 and 14, 7 discussion areas for recommendations following the consolidation of the different witness sessions that we've had over the past few meetings from a number of stakeholders and witnesses in terms of inputting into our review on performance monitoring and reporting within the borough. So happy to open that up if people have comments on those in terms of those 7 recommendations, in the hope that we can look to agree them this evening either in their current form or with minor amendments to take that forward into a final report that will come before us at the next meeting. Councillor Edgington?
Yes. Thank you, Chair. I think quite a lot of what I'd expected we would be recommending is within those 7. However, I think there was reference made on several occasions from the evidence which we took from witnesses about there having to be manual or manipulation of data when extracting it from the main software into Excel or whatever the presentation software was. And I think it would be worthwhile trying to suggest at least that there should be other ways in which that could be achieved. It seems to be quite a tedious, I'm sure it's very tedious, having done it myself a few times, I'm sure it's very tedious and time-consuming process. Similarly, there was also reference to, I think it was within young people's child protection or whatever, about the fact that there wasn't any real-time information available, that they were working from information which had been backed up the previous Sunday, and the data was therefore not readily available or not right up to date, which I think I'm sure in other authorities it's possible to do that. Yes, and I think those are the main things. What I accept is that we can't be too technical about such things. Our recommendations can't be technical, however much some of us think that we know. But clearly, it's just general recommendations, and I think those are my main ones.
Okay, thank you. No, I think they are fair in terms of consider some of the feedback that we have. In terms of trying to incorporate them either as new recommendations or build them into what we currently have. So I guess if I look at number 7, which talks around procurement, looking at external software and systems, is that... Okay, Naveed, do you want to come in first then before I go on?
Thank you, Chair. So just picking up on Councillor Edison's point, those areas for development, both the automation to move away from manual manipulation, but also the accessing more timely information, the solution for both of those actually lies in the tools that we have at our disposal. So procuring a more up-to-date system would allow us to address both those points. So it might be something that we incorporate within recommendation 7 as a way forward.
Yeah, that's sort of where I was angling. So I think at the minute where 7 is written, it's very broad. So if we can look to identify some of those specific points, like you said, in terms of to minimise or reduce the manual manipulation that teams are having to do, and to improve, where we're saying around real-time v historic, that's ultimately a data quality issue. So if there are systems that can speed up the way that data is obtained, I think that's a system or a tool issue rather than if I say a person or manual resource issue. Is that fair if we look to expand that and to build into those?
I'm quite happy.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't think I don't want to expand it longer.
Yeah.
No, I think it's probably better. It's better to be concise about these things rather than just too wordy.
Councillor Tubelar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That is what I was going to also say, that item 7 broadly should cover all the technology side, and therefore, going back to Mr. Eddington's view, majority of and the fundamental issues which the staff had was the extracting of the data. So therefore, if we look for tools and software, which is broadly explained in number 7, then we should really cover all technology areas, including the point you raised.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think you've brought... Naveed, I guess, did you have any sort of other comments you wanted to make, being, I guess, the closest to these were?
No, I think it was a really good reflection of the kind of key areas for development that we've got, especially around that first one, engaging cabinet members more in terms of selecting indicators as well, because I think there is an internal conversation that we have, and but engaging cabinet leads would also be quite a useful exercise in that process.
Okay, super. Thank you very much. On that basis, then we'll take those forward and build those into a final report. And number 7, we'll look to expand to an extent to cover some of those specifics in terms of the manual and data quality issues, if that's okay. Yeah, okay. So the other one, just having sort of thought about this and spoken internally around it, on point number 5, the recommendation around upskilling departments to, I guess, improve their own ability to manage business performance. The danger, I think, around doing this, if we went too far on it, is that you then lose elements of control and each department effectively does their own thing, and that then leads to inconsistency. So I think may look to reword that to build that slightly more into number 4, which is around ensuring that people are aware of what business performance do. So rather than looking to upskill, because ultimately business performance is responsible for this, that's you're the owner, not looking to take the work away from you, but it's to make sure that there is a link and understanding from departments and teams that are aware of what it is, and almost upskilling them in terms of when they receive it, how to present it, rather than just take it in the format that they may necessarily receive it in.
Chair, if I can just add to that, I think one of the key issues that we find when we come to talk about directorates and their use of data is around the data quality point. It's the inputting of data in an accurate way to ensure that whatever then is extracted by the corporate team is actually reflective of what's going on. So there might be something around data quality within that kind of wider directorate piece that I think would be quite useful to add in.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, so I think if we incorporate that into 4, and it's around an education or an understanding around the end-to-end flows of it. So if where people are doing the data input, they then understand how that goes through a process and where that data output arrives and what the presentable format is for that. Which, if they understand that or have more awareness around that, hopefully that will improve the accuracy and attention to detail on that.
Could I just?
Yeah.
Leading on from that, I wonder whether, I know that within Naveed's business performance group team, there are specialisations, people linked to particular departments. Are there situations where there's just one person involved in a particular dealing? So what would be the position if, for example, that person left? Would that create problems? Or is there some sort of cover for individuals in those situations?
So yes, absolutely. So I think we're only a team of 13. So business continuity and resilience is a really important part of the way in which we structure the team. So we do have, whilst we have leads in areas, we do have people who are supporting in a more junior role. So should they, should people leave, then we've got someone to step up and kind of almost just keep the light on, though, I think is the kind of the main thrust of it. They can't take on the whole role given they've got other parts of their sort of substantive role. But we do have that. And I think that's what touches on, it's not so much upskilling the directors to take work away, but I think just making sure that where some of the more menial tasks could then be picked up by services without recourse back to the corporate team, because they can do some of that data manipulation themselves.
Okay, thank you very much. So then, yeah, we'll take those as agreed, and we'll look to build that into a final report for the next meeting. Thank you, everyone, for the contributions, not just tonight, but over the number of witness sessions that we had. I think it's been, as always, with reviews, interesting when we learn different parts around the organisation. And Naveed, thank you to you and your team for all the help that you've given us on this as well. Agenda item 6 on the council website performance and improvements. This item we're going to have to defer until the January meeting. Unfortunately, officer unavailability to be able to make it today. Given the Mike Talbot is the right officer in terms of coming to this in terms of ownership and seniority, so it's not something we were able to delegate to someone more junior within that organisation or team. So that's why we're going to defer that to a time when he's going to be available. So that will now move to the January meeting, but I think the report will probably still stay the same and just be reissued for the next meeting. That takes us to agenda item 7 in terms of a paper from procurement. So Matthew, thank you very much for joining us this evening. This was an item in terms of titled How the Council Helps Local Small Businesses, which obviously given the pandemic has been a topical item. A lot of effort going back into the high streets and trying to get people back out to support those small businesses that clearly struggled at that time. So thank you for presenting it or submitting it as the paper. I expect members have already read through it, but gratefully if you can just provide a brief overview on it, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. So just a very kind of 4 or 5 minute intro to it, really. The procurement is increasingly seen as a policy lever to deliver local and national strategies. Part of what we are trying to deliver is the social value agenda, so that's the community wealth building, that's net carbon zero, it's jobs creation, it's skills and training. Clearly we're not doing all of that on our own, but we're trying to harness our spending power as a council to contribute to those efforts. So within that is a desire to support local businesses, and specifically in the case of this report, the smaller local businesses. So as I hope you've had a chance to read it, I'm not going to cover the legislative context except to say there's no explicit requirement to work with local businesses, but there's certainly a growing sense of the administration within the council that where it can deliver demonstrable benefits, we should be doing more of it. and I've set out some of those benefits within the report, and we might talk around those afterwards if that's any use. It doesn't come without its risks and challenges, and I'm not going to dwell on those, but they are real and need to be considered and managed through the process that we go through. And there's a point that I pick up in here around how do we define a local business. It's not. It could be straightforward. I tend to think it's not the most straightforward piece. I've documented here some success stories because it's always good to look at those and see actually this is what we are doing, and there's a lot going on. This is not a it's not a finite list. There are plenty more of local businesses that we're working with. So in terms of how we're doing this and what we're doing, and kind of it's a developing picture, I think it's worth saying. So I'll just pick out a few of those things. Updated tender documents. We're removing some of the complexity maybe and simplifying them where we can. That's going to benefit all businesses, and it does kind of one thing, which is make us a customer of choice, and we really need to be a customer of choice so we get those good suppliers working with us. The way in which we package our requirements and ask tender questions. So where we think we have a requirement that the local market can deliver, we need to be very careful and look how we structure that. And I think for me that's all about levelling the playing field. So if you look at some of the large businesses who tender, they've got specialist bid writing teams, and we've got to do whatever we can within the confines of the rules and regulations that we need to abide by to kind of, as I say, level that playing field. That can be right sizing of the size lots and the packages of work that we're offering out there. It can be the selection of questions that we ask of suppliers. But it certainly is a balancing act for me and my team to make sure we land that in the right way. Because obviously there continues to be governance expectations on us that we're doing our due diligence on suppliers. Next one is around seeking out local competition. It's not always easy finding companies who can and want to work with the council on our contracts, but we're actively looking for those, and we now have a one bid local policy where we really try and push and say, let the team go out and find someone who is local, who we think can bid on this tender. Next up, I've got local business support consultancy. So once again, for those companies who do want to work and try and engage and win council contracts, we want to offer them the support, whatever support we can, to help them and encourage them to do that. We're exploring options with a business support consultancy currently, who we have worked with we are currently working with at the Hayes Park redevelopment, the former Nestlé site. Developing the local market and suppliers. So where providers don't exist, we want to try and bring them along and try and develop them and see if we can encourage them to participate. And I put an example in there in the pack of occupational therapy contracts, and we continue to consider these options if there's anything we can do. And then finally, the last one is around reserving contracts. So there was a government initiative last year around potentially reserving below threshold contracts for local businesses. There's a little bit of discussion legally outside of Hillingdon as to the viability and the legality of that. So we're just watching that before we proceed and hopefully try to use it. So that's a summary of, I guess, some of the things that we are doing, and I put some next steps down here around continuation of the current approach. We need to do more of what we're currently doing. As I say, this is something that we're more recently starting to push, and therefore I think there's a piece around promotion to local businesses of what we're trying to do and the comms that go out. Part of that, once again, is updating our procurement pages in the council website, so that local suppliers can go and look and say, actually, how do I do this? Tell us that they are there. we want to become a customer of choice. We want, as I say, some businesses kind of, when you phone them up and say, we've got a contract that might be of interest, they don't always jump at us. They don't say, oh, it's council, great, I want to work with them. So we need to work ourselves on becoming a customer of choice. And then really there's this idea of the broader social value offering. I don't think you can see working with local business just in isolation, and it's around the skills, it's around innovation, and it's around net carbon zero. So that's a very quick overview of the contract, Chair, and any questions?
Thank you very much. Yep, happy to open to questions. Councillor Edginson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you for the report. It is, I think, the Preston model, isn't it, which is the local authority which is particularly concentrated on local suppliers, that a very large, a higher proportion, I won't say a very large proportion, but a higher proportion of their services are provided by local organisations, relatively small ones. I think I accept everything which has been said in the report. I always think that there seems to be, it was referred to in the report, that there tends to be a concentration on the price when a tender is assessed. So competing tenders are assessed principally 80% usually on price and the rest on quality, sometimes 40%, 60% or whatever, but there's never anything based on locality and sustainability on that basis, encouraging the local economy. Of course, when we look at the list of success stories, some of these organisations, although they've got their headquarters in Hillingdon, that's just because Hillingdon is close to the airport and is the headquarters for quite a lot of large organisations. Of course, the parking services company, I think, is German. Xerox, of course, is not specifically Uxbridge-based and is worldwide. I think there aren't on this list a lot of very small organisations which have contracts with the council, and inevitably I suppose it is because Uxbridge and Hillingdon does have so many large offices and large organisations. Perhaps the smaller organisations are kind of squeezed out in the economy generally. But now that things are a bit different over the last 2 years, I think perhaps it would be better to try and look to ways in which we can encourage small start-up businesses in Hillingdon. It's a bit of a struggle, I imagine, in terms of rents and rates and things like that. They're fairly expensive to start businesses here. But I really don't think, from what I can see, that there's a huge amount of other support apart from the procurement in matters which the officer has mentioned.
If I can just sort of follow on from that, I guess, where we talk around where we don't have that local small business engagement is one of the challenges. The contracts the council have are generally large contracts, and that it's therefore difficult for a genuine, if we say a small business, say, I don't know, less than 10 people, it's hard for them to, I guess, link back to your comment around making us a customer of choice. We're not in their target market because we as an organisation are potentially too big. Is that part of the challenge?
Yeah, I think that's fair, and that is true. There is, we talk about right-sizing contracts, and of course we could bundle up all our contracts, and if we just pick kitchens or bathrooms or windows, doors, or a lot of those sorts of things that we're buying as a council, we could bundle that up, and it could be I don't know, we could offer that out as a £20 million contract over 4 years. Well, that then is only available to the biggest of the companies. Now, we don't do that. We break it into a lot smaller lots, but they're still £300,000 lots, £200,000 lots. So I think your point, Chair, there around the size of those lots, and and that's where I think I referred to the balancing act. And if we break those lots too small, the cost to manage that from a council perspective will certainly increase, because we're not managing 2 or 3 or 4 suppliers, we're managing 10 or 15 suppliers, and that starts to present its own issues in terms of contract management and visibility of the work they're doing and different standards, and it just becomes increasingly difficult and complex for us to manage, and thereby more costly.
I seem to recall in the last day or so seeing a request for a decision. I won't go into any details because it's part 2, where there was some services being provided to the council where they, because of the present situation with a lack of manpower available, is actually having to be split down even more. So I think sometimes it is better to have a number of smaller smaller offers for the contract, and a larger number of local suppliers, if at all possible, because otherwise the benefits from, well, the profits from the contracts will otherwise go outside Hillingdon. If it's local businesses, then hopefully the profits will be retained here and will be spent here and encourage other businesses here. That's my thought anyway.
Yeah, and I do take that point, and I think it's just trying to get those thresholds right as to how small we can make those contracts before it ceases to be viable. But you're absolutely right. Having 3 or 4 suppliers rather than one large one is about business resilience and business continuity, and we've certainly got to build that thinking in, and especially with volatile supply chains that we currently see, we've got to build that into our thinking around our procurement strategies. Can I just pick up another couple of points that I think you made? So the price quality split that you were referring to, I've been with the council kind of 8 months now, I think, and one of the first things we did is take to council the change. You're absolutely right, we were 80-20 price quality. We've brought that back now to 50-50 price quality as the norm. Now that there's still scope within that to go 80-20 price quality or 20-80 quality price. So we've kind of pulled that back in because we could see that was an issue. I think it's worth just pointing out some of the commercial demographics that we have as a borough. We've got Heathrow is kind of so strong and prevalent in the south of the borough. It shapes some of the businesses that we're here. So if we were looking for logistics, or if we were looking for mass food catering, then hey, we'd be in a really strong position, wouldn't we, as a council, and we could deliver everything. But I'm not sure we are in that situation, and when we do we're doing increasing amount of outreach to look for businesses, and we can't always find them. So I don't think we should take that as they don't exist. I think we need to go and look for those and do some of that business engagement. Even that being said, we've got suppliers who are not in borough and then come and set up in borough. And one of the interesting things I've been doing over the last few weeks is looking at statistics of, okay, so you've set up in borough, but how many people do you employ in borough? And it's really quite interesting. It was a social care provider, and I think it was in the 90% region that they then employ in borough. So that for me is I take your point that the profit might not stay in borough, but that community wealth building certainly is, because the employment is in the borough. And sorry, just back to your point on the size of companies, I guess I put that range in there because I wanted to try and show a range of companies that, and I probably should have said actually this is for small businesses, but I take that point that there are two very big companies that I've included in the list there. I probably could have made that list a lot longer. Very, very small businesses that we might spend £2,000, £3,000, £4,000, £5,000 with a year, because they do exist. And I think one of the things that we probably need to do a bit more of is reporting, so we understand where we are, and we're starting to do that against. We can't drill down to the nth degree, but we can do postcode reporting against details held on our Oracle financial system by postcodes within the Hillingdon Borough.
Anyone, anything further? No? Lovely. Matthew, thank you very much for taking the time to come and speak to us this evening.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Brings on to agenda item 8, which is update on voluntary sector grants. So this came out in the last meeting, where obviously this item is on the forward plan for December Cabinet, and we looked to see whether we could get advanced citing of that report. And as the supporting information in the agenda says, that is not currently available in terms of the timing of those papers. But Kevin, thank you for joining us this evening. I think what we've got shared with us today is the equivalent report from last year, which gives a background into sort of how that process worked, and if you're able to just give an overview on that, and then see if we have any further questions, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. Good evening, even. So yes, as we've been explained, this report is a copy of what went to December Cabinet in 2020 for the grants programme for this year, 21-22. Next year's programme is in draft and is with elected members at the moment for views before publication, which will be just before December Cabinet, with the Cabinet member and with the leader. So I know what it is, but I can't actually talk to it yet because it hasn't been fully agreed, so we don't have the full answers. But this gives you an idea of the shape and the process that we go through. Would it help if I just talk through a little bit about what's in here and how we go about what we do and what the sort of the annual cycle is? So there are 4 component parts to the report, which adds up to about £2.4 million. They cover the bulk of the core grants, which is nearly £2 million to voluntary sector groups, a smaller amount of about £170,000 to older people's dining centres in the borough, a small scheme we have to provide transport grants, which is just less than £47,000, and a contribution that we make to the London Council's grant scheme, which adds up to £228,000. So that's the overall shape of it, and I'll stick with what is more local, really, which is basically the £2 million worth of core grants, if I may. I've set out in this report some of the issues that we were confronted with at that time, and if you remember back to December of last year, we were sort of going into, I think at that stage, another lockdown, if I can remember rightly. But we certainly the voluntary sector had been through quite a traumatic time over the previous 12 months leading up to that. Our annual cycle is that we notify groups that they can apply for the grant in around July. They have the summer to submit the grant application, so we get them in September, and we have the time between September and December Cabinet to do what we would call due diligence on those applications, talking to our financial colleagues and service areas within the council to take a view of the applications received to try and draw officer recommendations as to what grants should be supported. So during that period, so actually what is in here was submitted by a lot of the groups around September 2020, so quite a long time ago. And at that time, if you cast your mind back a little bit to this committee's review of the voluntary sector's response to COVID pandemic, which I helped you with a little bit early in the year, I think I said at the time there we'd made a clear a move to the grant recipients to say to them that we were not, as a local authority, going to be undertaking any sense of clawback from grants that people had received during the period of COVID and pandemic and lockdown. We wanted groups to have absolute flexibility, really, to use the grant for whatever purposes they need to help their survival and their delivery of services. We fully accepted that they would need to readjust and think about things very differently. Some would feel that they needed to perhaps mothball and take advantage of furlough schemes and other things. Others were going online to deliver services, etc. There's a whole raft of different responses. And that's reflected in here in part because that was where we were now. And of course, this time round, what we're seeing is the sort of the conclusions of that, a much fuller version of recovery. So that's where you were then. Where are you now? What's your forward strategy? And what is it you need to apply for from us? How can we help you to take that forward? Which we'll be seeing in the December Cabinet. So in report that's coming up shortly. So in terms of what the scheme is and why, we're it says in the report, I say unique actually. I'm not sure I've said that this time round because I can't hand on heart say that it's unique, but it's certainly unusual as a local authority that we do offer core grants. There are very few that still do, and certainly not in the way or to the extent that we do here in Hillingdon. We know from groups that the provision of core funding helps them in their overall efforts to provide services to local residents, but also to look for external funding to support their causes and to give them that sort of that boost, that kickstart to cover the core so that they can then grow and develop, and we can have a vibrant and successful voluntary sector in the borough. So that's the overall objective. Well, I mentioned where we are with COVID, which is covered in all of this. If I just talk through perhaps a little bit about how we engage with groups who are interested in applying for the grants program. It's an open competition program, so we will invite applications from anyone who wishes to apply, and we will consider those on merit against the published criteria. And we do have an information pack that groups will collect off us. We do encourage everyone who wants to apply to talk to us, because rather than just trying to go in blind and put in an application, it's certainly a view of the officers involved that we want to be honest with groups. We want to be able to tell them what their chances are, if we can, of being able to be successful. It's quite a high bar. We do expect groups to be able to demonstrate a number of things. I'll just touch on a few. They need to demonstrate what they're going to do. So what is the need they've identified, and what is their response to that? And we need to be sure that that's something that is valid. We insist on very good governance and strong financial management, so I want to see what their constitution is and a number of policies around risk management and such like. We want to make sure that groups we support will fit in with council plans and policies, so we're not going to support something that is perhaps taking service provision in an area into a completely different direction. We want to see groups that will support council work, and I'd go a stage further and say if groups are offering what we might regard as early intervention support, preventative type services, which are often perhaps short of statutory thresholds and such like, which will prevent people then moving into the need for formal council services because they're prevention, early intervention, particularly in the area around social care, then we would certainly look at that, and that would be a very important part of what we want to do. So we see that as a partnership. Mentioned external funding. It's certainly one of the criteria we'll use is to look at what amount of money that voluntary groups are able to lever in externally, whether it be from the lottery or from other types of potential funding out there, and see our grant as being the pump primer, if you like, for generating additional income. We absolutely look at value for money, and there will be some groups that we will say to, actually that's just too expensive. Actually, if we look at the number of beneficiaries and what they get for it and what you're asking for, that's just too much. And that varies from group to group because there will be some unit costs that are high and the benefit will be substantial. But there will be others where there will be less so. So we will push back and say to them, actually, we're not prepared to support that group. And we try to avoid replicating what is already in the borough. We won't generally wish to support groups that are looking to replicate something that's already there. So we have some key groups in the borough that are delivering services for certain groups, for carers, for people with mental health challenges, for people with disabilities, older people. Now, we would expect any group that wants to come to us and say, well, we'd like to apply for a grant to do something similar, we'd say, well, talk to them, please, and come to us with something that you think will be, show us where you'll add value and can have a joined up approach, because we don't really want to see competition. We don't want to see groups falling over each other to sort of trying to do the same thing, and we don't want to fund it twice. So that loosely is how we go about the applications. You'll see in the report the recommendations that were made for last year. I won't go through them all, but I will pick on one, if I may, just to explain the approach we've taken to this, and that is the support we gave to the local voluntary sector consortium, known as H4All, around capacity building. And I think we touched upon this briefly in the voluntary sector review earlier in the year. What we were able to do in discussion with H4All, which is also linked to Age UK and Harlington Hospice as component parts of H4All, was to say with a couple of projects that they had that weren't going so well up until the time of the grant application. Let's bring those together, and they were quite keen to develop a new role for H4All to work with other groups in the voluntary sector who were going through significant change, partly due to the pandemic, but not exclusively. There was a need well before then to help to support those groups in thinking through what their governance structure might need to be, their fundraising strategy, all of their forward plans, how they might need to readjust or transform to meet the changing needs, partly through pandemic, but also of how people are accessing services differently now, etc. So we supported that group last year with a small grant, and that helped to provide some support for groups around those areas, which we think was welcome. And the feedback so far has been good. That's helped to have something on offer beyond just saying yes or no to a grant. So there were one or two of the applications last year, which I think we declined to support because they weren't really ready, who we were able to refer into that system so that they could get a little bit more handhold support to get them to a stage where they may be able to apply to grant from us. So that's where we are. The next report will be published in about a week. I think my deadline is the 1st of December. Cabinet is the 18th of December. So it's going through that process, and will be an update of what we've done here. Hope that's useful.
Kevin, thank you very much. Happy to open the questions. Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's a very interesting report. Obviously a very unusual year anyway because of the circumstances. And the other thing which was different was, of course, the Hillingdon Community Trust had ceased in the previous year. So there was about £1 million of, admittedly not core funding, but funding to 6 boroughs or organisations supporting people in 6 boroughs, in 6 wards in the south of the borough. I wondered whether there were reviews made during the year of how the grants are being used, and do you get reviews back, reports back during the year? You mentioned that you didn't ask for money back, but in a normal year, would you be reviewing how things are going with all of the grants?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a very able voluntary sector development officer who reports to me, and she is out and about from it will be January through till July, basically, visiting each and every one of the grant recipients to make sure that what they said they were going to do, they're doing, to see how those issues are progressing for them, whether there's other things that we would want to share and work with them on, and we'll get drawn into all sorts of conversations about property, volunteering, all types of different things, spotting really opportunities where networking could help those groups to succeed and to thrive. So yeah, we monitor each group, and we insist on a report as part of the grant conditions that they provide us with a written report as to what they've done against what they said they would do, because we accept that things can change, not least through what we've been through recently, but in any year things can change. Their priorities might change, and this is grant, it's not a contracted service, so it's not ring-fenced money. They can actually use the money on whatever they wish to use it for. Of course, if they don't use it for what they said they were going to use it for, then they're not likely to get any more, and we'll want to know whether it's been spent properly, and we'll have a right of audit, or if we want to. So, on the whole, it's in their interest to work with us on all of this. But if there are some adjustments, then we find we have those conversations during the year. Some organisations will struggle for different reasons, and that happens from each year. You'll see from the annual reports that there's a few come off, a few come on. Things do change. So yes, we do, and absolutely monitoring is a key part of the whole process, because it enables us to sort of to spot where things are going and what sort of signals we might want to give to groups as to whether that we would. I would hope. I think I can say this, that in the report that will go to December Cabinet, there'll be no surprises for the groups. If there are changes there, and there will be, then they would have had some sort of notice about it, because we've been talking to them about it during the course of that process. So there will be some, for example, where we are now in terms of taking a stronger view on what recovery looks like for groups. So if they hadn't needed to spend the grant that they got in this report, well then we'll say, okay, well maybe you don't need so much next year then. That's not because we're clawing back particularly, it's saying, well, where are you now, where are you going, and what do you need? And we'll take account, and there'll be one or two where that will happen. And we've had those conversations mostly to say, actually it looks like, given your levels of reserves, for example, maybe you don't need quite such a much grant this year.
Thank you. Yes, I've been involved with various projects. In fact, I was on Hillingdon Community Trust as a trustee for 6 years, I think, quite some time ago. I understand. So, from what I gather, although you do go out and speak with all of the organisations towards the end of the year, there's no formal obligation or expectation that they're going to give you an interim report of how things are going during the year, unless presumably things are going really badly, in which case they might be coming back to you for kind of help in some way.
We try to keep in touch with them. They are required as part of the grants condition to provide a monitoring report, which we asked for in the summer. So it is a little bit retrospective because there is a cycle in this process. But if we would try and keep our ear to the ground and pick up on issues that will occur from time to time around performance, and they do. You know, some groups will struggle because there will be key individuals that will move on that may cause challenges, all those sorts of things. Or they may come to an end of a lease, or a grant that they had from something like the community trust will fall or come to an end, and they perhaps hadn't planned for that properly. Should have done, but don't always. So in that sense, yes, we would work with groups as best we can to try and find ways forward.
Okay, Kevin, thanks very much. Thank you. Okay, so that moves us to agenda item 9, which is the forward plan. Does anyone have any questions or comments on that? No? Happy to note that. So agenda item 10 is our work programme. So the next meeting is 12th of January. So obviously the change to the work programme that's published is the website upgrade and performance item will move to that. We'll also look to have the final report from our review to that meeting as well. And we will also have the budget proposal for the following financial year in that January meeting. Councillor Edgerton?
Just looking at this, February seems to be very quiet, to be honest, the way things are going. I wonder whether there might be an opportunity to look at something else.
Absolutely, yes. You're right to know that. There are quieter months ahead for the meetings. There is one small paper due also in February, but if there are other small, I guess, one-off topics that members would like to be considered to look at, then we can look to build those into those final months of the municipal year.
I wonder whether one area which I don't think we've looked at, or I can't see we have, is corporate communications. I don't know whether that might be a possibility.
Let's a quick.
I think it does appear within
terms of reference. Yeah, corporate communications. So within that, where are you? Is that internal communications, external communications?
I think it's external communications, really. Yes. Press releases, things like that. How these are distributed, and whether people can just apply to be on the list to receive press releases.
Them, how that. And yeah, I guess how.
I don't know whether press releases really apply anymore because it's more by Twitter and.
Yeah, but I guess previously you'd have had a distribution list there to send to, whereas now it just.
I remember not being allowed to be on the list, but.
Okay.
But that's perhaps because I didn't have a union card or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's fair. At least we can take that away and look to see where that sits. Speak to comms, see how that's currently managed and what we can look to build in on that. But I think that would be a suitable topic to cover off in one of those meetings.
Did you have a preference, Chairman, in terms of timing or?
March.
March, okay, yep. Thank you.
Okay. With that draws us to a close tonight. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and see you in January. Have a good Christmas.